What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. My name is Daniel, and today, for this heater of an episode, we are going to talk about something that is not controversial at all and surely will not draw any strong feelings from any side: politics. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I don't know. Maybe we are. Here's the deal. Recently, the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, has released 3 proposals to improve Soldier Field in an effort to keep the Chicago Bears from moving out of the city into the suburbs to Arlington Heights. So, when I told you this is going to be a political episode, I was only half joking. So I think unless you've been living under a rock for like the past 8 months, the Bears recently bought the Arlington Racetrack, which is this very historic property in Arlington Heights. It's a suburb north of the city, and they haven't done anything to it. I'm not even sure if the deal is finalized. When they bought the property last year, they said the agreement isn't expected to finish until late 2022 or early 2023. So nothing has even happened yet, but because they play in Chicago and the media is always, putting their eye on things, that's created some buzz to think that the Bears are going to move. And there's been so much buzz that the mayor has decided to get involved, and she has appointed a task force to investigate Soldier Field and try to see if there are improvements that can be made. And what did the task force say? Well, yes, there definitely are things that can be improved to Soldier Field. So, what did this commission that the mayor created come up with? So, as I mentioned before, 3 proposals to improve Soldier Field. One proposal puts a dome over Soldier Field, which is something. Another makes the field quote-unquote dome ready. This is according to a Chicago Tribune article. I was looking at it. You can probably find it on the internet. It does a pretty good job explaining the situation. But yeah, dome ready, not exactly sure what that means, but that's another proposal. And the third proposal strives to make the field more versatile. I think they said, for example, like having soccer games there or just other activities in general. So the plans, depending on which one is enacted, could cost up to about $2 billion, which might seem like a lot of money. And keep in mind, it is. But compared to other recent NFL stadiums that have been built, such as the Rams and Chargers new stadium, which cost $5 billion, this doesn't seem terrible. So that's kind of the situation. Now, for those who care more about like the political side to this, the task force also recommended transforming Solidarity Drive, which is like this road that kind of runs like towards the lake. It goes east-west, and it's on what's called the museum campus. So Soldier Field, it's right on the lake, and it's right next to the Field Museum, as well as like the planetarium and stuff like that in Chicago. So what the task force wants to do is transform Solidarity Drive into what the article calls a year-round plaza, which creates educational programs for kids and adds large-scale art to rejuvenate the campus. According to the article, the report also recommended improving CTA service and reducing traffic in the area. So CTA is like public transportation, trains and buses and stuff like that. Article goes on to say many of the report's ideas are likely to run into financial or political challenges as officials wait for the Bears to make a decision and sort out their next steps. So, there's a lot of stuff in there. Now, here's the thing about this situation. Before I even get into my opinion, we have to establish what what is the timeline for this kind of thing. So, obviously, even if renovations were to happen, nothing would come of it for a couple years, because number one, renovations take a while, and there's a lot of political capital and a lot of things that need to be sorted out. This is very preliminary. But also, if we go with the other option and the Bears decide to leave Soldier Field, that's not happening anytime soon. So sorry to the people who just like hate Soldier Field for some reason and want the Bears to leave. But first of all, the Bears don't even own Soldier Field. And that's something that a lot of certain people like dunk on them for. The McCaskies, the owner of the team, they do not own the field itself. It's actually owned by the Chicago Park District. So that means that the Bears have to lease the stadium. Now, this lease does not expire until 2033. So they still, if they want to play out the lease, they're going to have to wait 11 years. However, they could get out of the lease by paying $84 million, which, come on, this is the Bears. They don't pay their players. Why would they pay $84 million to get out of the lease? And that wouldn't even happen if they were to pay the money until 2026. So that's the thing, is that this is not going to be an immediate thing. Even if the Bears say tomorrow, we're building a new stadium in Arlington Heights, that doesn't do anything because they're still legally obligated to be like involved with Soldier Field. Now, the other thing that kind of throws a wrench into this whole situation, which to me is really weird, is that after these plans were unveiled by the mayor, the Bears were asked for a comment, and they kind of just put out the same comment that they put out last month when, this news was recirculating. And in that statement says something kind of weird. It essentially says, when the Bears bought the Arlington racetrack property, they agreed to not look for any alternative projects for a stadium, including renovating Soldier Field, other than the property that they have just bought. So, I'm not a lawyer, but as you can tell by my exceptional analysis here, I'm pretty much a lawyer. But apparently the Bears, when they bought the Arlington racetrack, they basically agreed with the developer that was selling it that that racetrack is the only one for them and that there are no other racetracks that they want to renovate. So that's really, really, really weird, because that means that, like, technically, whatever, proposal the mayor puts out as to how to handle Soldier Field, the Bears can't listen to, because that would be like breaching a contract. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but that doesn't make any sense to me, because whatever the mayor will try to do to keep, the McCaskies from moving will be in vain, because the Bears have to just plug their ears and turn the other way, because they'd be breaching the contract. Now, that statement, though, that the Bears can't look into any other projects, including Soldier Field, is a pretty good indicator that they might be already out the door of Soldier Field, which is very sad if that is the way that it goes down. But then again, I covered this exact topic on my first episode of Chicago Sports Unlimited on the radio at 88.1 FM WNTH, which hopefully will be coming back in the fall. But yeah, that was my first episode. I talked about this exact situation when it happened, and that the Bears have tried to move out of Soldier Field like 3 times before in the 90s, and they've gotten out of it. So I'm not saying that there's no legal way for the Bears to just kind of like shrug off whatever like clause in the contract there is that says you can't talk to any other developers, including the Chicago Park District. But that is kind of weird, because it kind of insinuates that the Bears are like, they're done looking, and that they've set on Arlington Heights as a place where they potentially would want to build a new stadium. So, with this whole situation, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, has also opened the door to having another NFL team playing there, which Yeah, that's a thought. That is quite a thought. I mean, I know Chicago has two baseball teams, but come on, we don't need two football teams. Just, I mean, I don't know. I think my takeaway from this is that the whole situation is just so strange. The mayor, to me, kind of seems like like this is more of a political issue for her, and I understand that because it is a political issue. But from the perspective of a fan, it's kind of just like it's just strange because, I know that obviously, politicians change and the Bears have been playing here since the 70s, but there's just so much animosity between the two parties, the Bears and the, city of Chicago, that have been working together for half a century. And frankly, there doesn't seem to be a good solution to the problem. As much as I try to be optimistic about the Bears, and usually fail with that optimism, this one, I just can't really wrap my head around a feasible way for both sides to find a solution because there's just so many moving parts here. There's the stadium's age, there's the stadium's reputation of, a negative kind of reputation from the previous renovation. There's difficult politics involved. There's the Bears' motives, which seem to be kind of all over the place. So I'm going to try to sort this situation out in a way that is digestible for people who do not know and or care about politics or architecture or business or whatever else. So, here's a fact. Soldier Field is very outdated and, without a doubt, needs to be improved in some way. Now, many of you were probably alive the last time the Bears and the city of Chicago decided to renovate Soldier Field. That was back in 2002, so unfortunately I was not around for that. But if you do remember, this will probably go without saying, but the 2002 renovations certainly were not done correctly. There's plenty of things that were wrong with it. Seating capacity was decreased by about 4,000 seats, I believed. The stadium was taken off the list of National Historic Landmarks like 3 years after the renovations were done. Taxpayers dropped almost $500 million for the stadium redesign, which makes sense because it's, they're working with the city. Of course, it's going to be public money, but the redesign, I think, tried to update old and like cramped seating. That's what they were going for. But in the end, the seating didn't really change. And a lot of prominent architects in Chicago saw the new product as a disaster. If you wonder why Chicagoans call Soldier Field a UFO, is because it looks like a UFO. Soldier Field is an 100-year-old stadium with very classical architecture, and it did not seem to blend with the new material that they used to renovate the stadium. Another issue that people bring up, I think I was talking to my dad about this yesterday, it was that parking is still really bad going to Soldier Field. You have to park really far away. Parking is very expensive. You got to walk like 15 minutes, at least if you're coming from the north. And even though Soldier Field is in like right in the middle of town, in a very popular part of town where a lot of people go, it's kind of a double-edged sword because parking is really hard to find. That's probably why the task force created by Mayor Lightfoot recommended to kind of improve transportation to the stadium, because that's definitely a turnoff for a lot of fans. You know what else is a turnoff is the fact that Soldier Field seats about 61,500 people, which might seem like a lot, and plot twist, it's not actually. 61,500 people, the Bears seating capacity is actually the lowest of any NFL stadium. This is fairly well known, but kind of hard to grasp in some way. But the Bears, even though Soldier Field seems like a pretty big stadium, actually seats the fewest amount of people. So that's definitely an issue. This is also kind of a smaller issue, but like diehard fans probably know about this. The Bears are also one of the few teams to still play on real grass. A lot of NFL teams play on artificial turf. So playing on real grass is, I would guess, it's better for the environment. But playing on that grass also can be bad for a couple reasons. One is that there's been complaints that the team has not done a good job of maintaining the grass, like when it rains and when when the grass freezes, when it gets cold in Chicago. And also, it's an issue for the players too, because this came up a lot, especially last season when, I remember Fields kept slipping in the pocket, and it wasn't because his shoes were bad or something like that. It wasn't even because they were playing in bad weather. It was in October, but it just had rained the previous couple days, so the grass wasn't dry yet, or it wasn't artificially dried yet. So that can lead to injuries. You don't want players slipping around anywhere. You don't want mud on your field when there doesn't have to be. So definitely playing on real grass. It's cool for a historical stadium like Soldier Field, but it might not be the best thing for the health of the players. So, with that out of the way, are there even pros and cons of staying at Soldier Field? I think there are, but it's really under the condition that the stadium is actually renovated. Under one of the mayor's proposals, seating capacity would increase to around 70,000, increasing the seating capacity by 8,000, whatever. So that would put the Bears in the middle of the pack in terms of seating capacity across all of the NFL stadiums. I think the most is something like 78,000, something like that. So 70,000 is a good number. That's fine. That's under the condition that the stadium is renovated with that specific proposal. If the Bears decided to put a retractable dome, I shouldn't say the Bears because they don't own the stadium. So let's just say if the city decided to put a retractable dome above Soldier Field, that would allow the Bears to host Super Bowls because they could close it if it gets bad weather in February, which of course it will. It's Chicago. It's going to be 10 degrees. They could host the Olympics there. They could put other venues concerts have a lot of pyrotechnics, so maybe not, the dome really doesn't change that. And also the Weeknd just performed there a week ago. So yeah, whatever. But they could probably host better venues, more high profile stuff. So that not only benefits the team, but it benefits the entire city as a whole because they're making revenue because people are paying to see venues there and people are paying to book venues there. Better facilities through a renovation of Soldier Field could equip better, better tenants for concerts and music festivals, which Chicago has a lot of. They could hold a lot more stuff there, which would again make a lot more money for the city. If you're looking at it through the lens of the previous renovations that the Bears decided to do 20 years ago, optimistically, the Bears and the city would have another shot to correct the mistakes of the previous renovation. And, possibly with that in the rearview mirror, they'd actually be able to make the stadium look nicer and accommodate the fans better. The whole museum campus, which is exactly what it sounds like, all of the museums and that whole kind of plot of land that Soldier Field shares with the Field Museum, Planetarium, yada, 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 that could be made more flexible for other events like the proposals said, which again makes the city a lot more money. But maybe, in my opinion, this is most importantly, and I don't think this gets talked about enough, the Bears keep their premium location in the city. I don't think that can be understated how good of a location Soldier Field is in, because Soldier Field is right on the lake. It is just south of the loop. It cannot be a better location. It is a beautiful part of the city that the Bears play in. They should be making a lot more money off, ticket prices for there just because of the location. but they can't because of the aforementioned difficult access to the stadium, and the stadium maybe not being super desirable because of its age and poor maintenance. But even if the Bears get a better stadium in Arlington Heights, I feel like it's worth considering that the location is just so much better in downtown Chicago. And I think that that's something that the mayor actually does understand pretty well and points that out. She says in that Chicago Tribune article I've been referencing that any team would be foolish not to consider staying in Chicago at Soldier Field because, even when you drive by that place, the UFO is kind of an eyesore sometimes, but you look at all the museums next to it and just the part of town you're in, and it doesn't make any sense to leave that. So they would keep their location if they wanted to stay in Soldier Field. Now, a lot of the proposals that have been brought up involve putting a dome on Soldier Field. And so outside of even making a dome on Soldier Field would probably look kind of weird depending on if it's executed correctly. The big problem with that I see is that the Bears kind of lose their whole shtick of being, the hard stadium to play in. This might not come to mind for NFL fans, who are my age or a little younger as much because the Bears haven't been good. But when they actually were good, it's no one wanted to play at Soldier Field because it was always a sold out crowd. The fans were loud and, very supportive of their team, but also it would be, 20 degrees there and snowing or something. It's the magic of the lake effect weather in Chicago, and it's, always really difficult for a lot of the warm weather teams especially to play in. But if you put a dome on the stadium, then they'd just be playing in room temperature, with no precipitation at all, which, is fine if you're playing in a place like Florida or something where it's raining half the time and it's, 100 degrees out with 100% humidity. But in Chicago, that's kind of what gives the Bears their charm, is the fact that they play so well in good weather. So that option with the dome, though, kind of exists regardless of where they are, because they would still have to consider that if they moved to Arlington Heights. So what are the pros of moving to the suburbs? So first, fans in the northern suburbs would have better access to the stadium. If you live north of the city, kind of on the North Shore, even if you live in southern Wisconsin, Kenosha or something like that, you'll have better access to the stadium. Of course, on the flip side, people who live south of the city or in Gary, Indiana, which there are a lot of Bears fans in Indiana, would have to drive all the way through the city, which is hard enough, and then drive a little bit more to get to Arlington Heights, where their stadium would be. If you live in that county where Arlington Heights is, you'd probably have to pay for it in your taxes for a little bit. So that's definitely a negative. On the flip side, the Bears get another stadium on a historic property. Arlington Racetrack is an 100-year-old place where they've done horse racing over the years. It is a historic property. The Bears get to start from scratch with a new stadium, so they don't have to deal with difficult renovations on an old building. As I mentioned before, the Arlington Racetrack is a historic property, but they're not going to be it's a racetrack. It's not a building, so it's a little bit different. If the stadium is, built well and is high quality, something like a SoFi Stadium, a US Bank Field, a Mercedes-Benz Stadium, all of the new ones that have been built in the past 5 to 10 years, and, it's up to par with the others, the Bears should be able to host Super Bowls and enjoy all of the money-making venues that could come with a renovated Soldier Field, for example. And yes, theoretically, they own their own stadium. However, here's the thing about this. Now, I understand that is important for businessmen, but the one thing that the business types who don't actually know anything about business or football for that matter don't understand about this situation with the Bears owning their own stadium is that the McCaskies, they are wealthy, but that their wealth only comes from the team. It's a big difference between someone like the McCaskies or like Jerry Jones or Robert Kraft. Jerry Jones, for example, struck it big in like the energy industry in Texas and then used that money to buy the Cowboys in the 90s. The McCaskies have ran the Bears since the Bears were created. So all of their wealth comes from the team. They're accountants. Like, they have spent a living running the team. So my point in that is that they will not own their own stadium because they don't have the means to buy the stadium. If they did, they would have to sell a portion of the team, or maybe they could keep all of the team, but then they would have to split the shares of the stadium between, a group of investors and theirself. And like, for example, like the Patriots don't own Gillette Stadium. It's not really. It's owned by Robert Kraft and a group of other investors. So they would not own their own stadium. They'd still have to clear anything they do through a board of like investors who have bought into it. There's a clarification. Also, like, I don't know, this is just me ranting now, but like, not that this even matters. Like, I mean, the Packers and the Cowboys don't own their stadiums. And the Cowboys stadium is literally nicknamed Jerry World after their owner, quote unquote, Jerry Jones. They don't even own their stadium. The city of Arlington owns it. Like, the Packers don't own Lambeau Field, and that's pretty well known. So the people who think it's so important for the Bears to own their own stadium, first of all, don't understand that they won't own their own stadium, and also that you can be a successful franchise and not own your own stadium. That's like, I don't know, it's just looking purely through the mind of business. So anyway, I think the reason why, like, there is an argument to be made about why owning your own stadium is important. I get that. But the thing is, I think it's important for the McCaskies in particular because they're not like expert business people. They're, accountants, and they've been trained to run the team. They haven't had to go through selling the team. Again, they're not like Jerry Jones, who's like a master businessman. Jerry Jones just kind of like strong-armed the city of Arlington to build a new stadium. I don't think the McCaskies either have the ability or really have the energy to do that. So I'm sure owning a stadium in Arlington Heights is important, but I don't think it's the most important thing, and I don't think it's a priority. So there we go. Mini rants out of the way. The negatives for moving to Arlington Heights are you potentially alienate a lot of fans in the city because you moved out, and as well as the city itself. Like, I don't know, let's say that the Bears try to like really commit to moving to Arlington Heights and the deal falls through for whatever reason and they got to go back to Soldier Field. Like, that is not going to be easy. So that is a big gamble that they're taking. If they decide to move to Arlington Heights, they're going to like really run the risk of hurting a lot of people in the city. In my opinion, the location in Arlington Heights is going to be just like worse. No offense to Arlington Heights. It's a very nice town. I've been there multiple times. It is a lovely place, but you cannot beat the location of Soldier Field. Again, right on the lake in a nice part of Chicago. Like, you cannot beat that location. Doesn't matter how good your stadium is. You cannot beat the location. So there definitely are some pros and cons for both options, staying and renovating or moving to the suburbs. If you ask me, I think that if the Bears and the city can find a way to get a well-done renovation of Soldier Field that increases seating, modernizes the stadium, gets rid of the real grass they play on, I don't think it works anymore. And doesn't tear the entire stadium down, but also doesn't make it look like a UFO, that's probably the best option. I do lean towards letting the Bears stay in Soldier Field. The location's too good. It's too historic of a property. I think they should kind of buckle up and try to, hang in there a bit and just try to see if you can actually improve the stadium rather than running to, in my opinion, a less desirable location. I don't even know if all the stuff I want out of a potential renovation of Soldier Field is even possible all at the same time, but I think that if they were able to do that, then that would be good for all parties involved. As for the dome, like building a dome over Soldier Field, I'm kind of impartial. If they want to do it, like, yeah, you can do it. But if they don't, I would understand why, because again, you want to preserve that, that charm of playing in the cold, in the sleet and all of the lovely weather we get here in Chicago. At least they're not being sued by the Justice Department like the Cubs. That's going to do it for another absolute banger of an episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. Thank you all for listening if you've made it all the way through. If you like hearing me share my opinions on all things sports, check out our page. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, all of the places to get your podcast. I'm going to be on vacation soon, so probably won't have an episode next week. But when I get back, hopefully have a couple more. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this whole situation with the Bears unfolds. So if you have recommendations for future episodes, please hit me up. I'm always looking for new content and new ideas to share my opinions on. So that's going to do it for me. I'm signing off. I'll see you all next time.